The White Queen is the narrative of a woman possessing dragon-like eyes whose illicit affection altered the trajectory of English history, namely Elizabeth Woodville. However, to what extent does the series reflect genuine historical events, and how much is a fabrication by Phil Gregory and the program's creators?
This will be explored in this analysis. Upon its release, the White Queen series encountered considerable disapproval, primarily concerning inaccuracies in costume and set design.
Critics noted contemporary zippers and stitching on garments, along with visible plumbing and construction features in the scenery that were absent in the 15th century. However, excessive attention to such minutiae seems somewhat unwarranted.
Realistically, would viewers find the series engaging if the female characters' appearances mirrored those of women in the mid-1500s? During that era, fashion trends could be quite unconventional.
One popular practice involved shaving off eyebrows and the front of the hairline to create the illusion of a larger, more childlike forehead. Some historians suggest this may have also served a hygienic purpose by reducing areas where lice could hide.
And headwear deserves its own discussion. While the show features some authentic headpieces on background actors, Elizabeth herself is not depicted wearing them, which is rather ironic given that Elizabeth Woodville is seen wearing a hennin in her most recognized portrait.
This hennin was a tall, cone-shaped headdress, accompanied by a large veil held in place by wire. Transitioning from appearances, consider this intriguing detail about Edward IV, Elizabeth's spouse. He possessed long, chestnut hair, akin to his brother's, a hair color then considered the epitome of male attractiveness. Furthermore, he was notably tall for the period, standing at approximately 190 centimeters or 6 feet 3 inches, while the average height for a European man ranged from 162 to 170 centimeters. This information comes from the exhumation and measurement of his remains in 1789. Ultimately, it seems reasonable to overlook the modernized aesthetics and beauty ideals presented in the show and concentrate on the more significant aspect, the genuine historical context underlying the drama. The series encompasses a period of 21 years, spanning from 1464 to 1485. In fairness, the series accurately represents many key historical events.
Elizabeth's initial encounter with Edward, Warwick's schemes, Jacquetta's elaborate courtly maneuvers, and her overall portrayal are presented vividly and with due regard for the spirit of the era.
However, the program deviates from historical accuracy at some point, venturing into the realm of hearsay and gossip, presenting them as established truths. Consider this instance.
Following Edward's restoration to the throne, the series depicts him and his brothers proceeding to the Tower and personally suffocating Henry VI in his sleep to neutralize the threat. Elizabeth inadvertently witnesses this act of murder, adding dramatic flair.
In reality, Henry VI did pass away the day before Edward's second coronation on May 21, 1471, and the timing was undeniably suspect. While most people at the time believed that Edward had orchestrated his death, no credible historical source suggests that Edward himself smothered Henry with a pillow. The more widely accepted account suggests that Henry was murdered while praying in Wakefield Tower.
For a considerable period, Richard was held responsible, largely due to Thomas More, who authored his biography during the reign of Henry VIII.
Naturally, Moore was unlikely to portray the enemy of the king's father in a complimentary manner.
Additionally, the actual cause of death may not have been suffocation. In 1910, Henry's remains were exhumed, revealing a severely fractured skull and blood on the surviving strands of hair.
Given the rudimentary state of forensic science in the early 20th century, definitive answers remained elusive. However, the show embellished the historical facts. Another example of the series' reliance on rumor rather than verifiable fact, for which it has often been criticized, is the extensive use of mystical and magical elements.
Some viewers may find it to be an intriguing touch, adding an element of intrigue. Now, addressing the question of whether Elizabeth Woodville was a witch, Philip Gregory's premise that the Woodvilles were indeed witches has a tenuous basis in historical fact.
In 1469, during a period when Warwick had seized control of King Edward and was effectively governing the kingdom, Elizabeth's mother, Jessetta, was accused of practicing witchcraft.
A man named Thomas Wakeake asserted that he possessed a lead likeness of a man-at-arms, approximately the length of one finger, broken in its center and joined with a wire, alleging that Jacquetta crafted it for purposes of witchcraft and sorcery.
He even enlisted the support of a local parish priest who testified that Jacquetta had fashioned two figures representing the king and queen, purportedly intended as a love charm to ensure Edward's marriage to her daughter. However, the populace of London rallied behind Jacquetta, and the case swiftly disintegrated. There was a dearth of tangible proof, merely unsupported accusations. Later, Richard IV endeavored to resurrect the witchcraft allegation, employing it as a legal pretext to argue that his brother Edward's union with Elizabeth had been illegitimate.
Yet, beyond these two instances, no historical source gives any credence to the notion that the Woodville women were practicing witches. Nonetheless, accusing women of witchcraft was a frequently used strategy.
From Joan of Arc to Anne Boleyn, it was frequently a means of silencing women who defied social expectations or possessed excessive influence. What is your assessment?
Did the element of magic introduce an intriguing dimension to the show, or did it stray too far into the realm of fantasy? This leads to the question of whether historical accuracy should always be paramount in dramatizations, or if creative liberties are acceptable for entertainment value.
The use of alleged supernatural occurrences in shows often adds drama and intrigue, but it can also distort the historical understanding if viewers perceive these embellishments as actual.
Furthermore, the debate raises the issue of how women in power were often perceived in history, with accusations of witchcraft serving as a tool to undermine their authority.
Should historical dramas prioritize accurate representations of women in their roles, even if it means sacrificing some dramatic flair? These are complex questions without easy answers, inviting viewers to contemplate the relationship between historical fact and fictional storytelling.
The impact on the perception of historical figures, especially women, necessitates a thoughtful approach to balancing drama with historical responsibility. Therefore, viewers are left to ponder the extent to which embellishments enhance or detract from the overall historical narrative.
Now, it is time to restore the reputation of Margaret Beaufort, arguably the most unfairly depicted woman throughout the entire series. To begin, the series invents a clandestine romance between her and Jasper Tudor, the brother of her initial husband. Furthermore, it depicts her suffocating him with a pillow, an act completely unsupported by historical evidence. Their relationship was most likely purely political, centered around their shared ambition to safeguard young Henry Tudor and eventually secure his ascension to the throne. But is it truly a historical drama if there is no clandestine love story? Incidentally, there existed a 12-year age disparity between them, which the series blatantly disregards.
If Henry Tudor is portrayed as 5 years old, and considering that Margaret gave birth to him at 13, she would be 18, while Jasper would be approximately 30. However, they are inexplicably presented as contemporaries on screen due to the demands of television narratives.
Additionally, the show essentially transforms Margaret into a villain, accusing her of orchestrating the demise of her half-brother, someone named Richard. However, let us engage in some rudimentary fact-checking. Margaret's mother, also named Margaret, but bearing the surname Bosham, had 9 children from 3 marriages.
Thus, while Margaret Buffett did indeed have half-siblings, none of them was named Richard. There were 2 Johns and 1 Oliver, each with their own captivating stories and historical legacies.
For example, her elder half-brother, John St. John, was the great-grandfather of Jean Boleyn, a wife of George Boleyn, and her younger half-brother, John Wells, married Cecily of York, the sister of Elizabeth of York.
While Margaret did technically have a stepbrother named Richard, her mother, Margaret Beauchamp, was his stepmother. To be precise, Richard was significantly older than Margaret, and it was not even him who opposed Edward IV, but rather his son, who was subsequently executed.
However, the show clearly disregards such details, choosing instead to portray Margaret as a ruthless antagonist, willing to sacrifice her own brother to secure Risson's future throne or to retaliate against her mother, depending on the narrative needs.
This manipulation of historical facts raises questions about the responsibility of historical dramas in maintaining a degree of accuracy, especially when portraying complex family relationships and political rivalries.
The distortion of Margaret Buffett's character serves to create a more dramatic narrative, but at the expense of historical integrity. This raises the debate about the extent to which creative license should be allowed when depicting real historical figures. Finally, we address the most egregious accusation leveled against Margaret Beaufort by the series, her alleged involvement in the deaths of the princes in the Tower. The show suggests that Margaret pressures the Duke of Buckingham to orchestrate their murder.
However, upon close re-examination of that particular episode of The White Queen, it becomes apparent that Anne Navelle is also depicted as having an interest in the boys' deaths.
Essentially, the series completely omits Richard III from the equation, apportioning the blame between these 2 women. In reality, the majority of historians attribute responsibility squarely to men, with Richard III himself being the prime suspect. Although some theories implicate Henry VII, or Henry Stafford, of course the mystery surrounding the princes in the Tower remains a significant and ongoing topic. Historians continue to debate the matter, and new theories continue to surface.
For instance, the Missing Princes Project, initiated in 2021, proposes that the elder prince, Edward V, may have survived and lived out his life in rural England. The series' alteration of historical events to implicate Margaret Beaufort and Anne Neville raises concerns about the perpetuation of gender biases in historical narratives. By removing Richard III from the equation and assigning blame to women, the series may inadvertently reinforce stereotypes about women as power-hungry and ruthless.
This manipulation of historical events not only distorts the facts, but also contributes to a biased understanding of the past. It is crucial for historical dramas to approach complex mysteries, such as The Princes in the Tower, with a balanced and nuanced perspective, avoiding the temptation to sensationalize or distort historical events for dramatic effect.
The ongoing debate and the emergence of new theories underscore the complexity of the historical record, highlighting the need for careful research and responsible storytelling. That version is also presented in the television program, where Elizabeth Woodville, not wanting to risk all her assets, exchanges her second son with another child and secretly conceals her true son. However, it is important to remember that this is only conjecture. Therefore, the mystery surrounding the missing princess remains unsolved. Although Margaret Beaufort may have been involved, there is no concrete proof to substantiate this claim. In effect, the show transforms her into a religious zealot willing to murder anyone who opposes her without any legitimate justification. The portrayal of Margaret Beaufort as a ruthless religious fanatic willing to kill anyone in her way lacks any factual basis and appears to be an exaggeration for dramatic effect.
This depiction seems to be a fabrication designed to create conflict and tension within the narrative, rather than an accurate reflection of historical events. The series often takes liberties with historical accuracy, prioritizing entertainment over strict adherence to the historical record. The lack of justification for this portrayal raises questions about the series' commitment to historical accuracy and its tendency to sensationalize events for dramatic impact.
The narrative choices made by the show's creators can significantly influence viewers' perceptions of historical figures and events, making it crucial to approach such portrayals with a critical eye.
The series' depiction of Margaret Beaufort as a religious fanatic without any real justification the series' depiction of Margaret Beaufort as a religious fanatic without any real justification contributes to the overall trend of historical inaccuracies and dramatic embellishments that characterize the show.
This exaggeration of historical events can mislead viewers and create a distorted understanding of the past, highlighting the importance of consulting multiple sources and verifying information presented in historical dramas.
The portrayal of historical figures should be approached with caution, recognizing that dramatic license is often employed to enhance the narrative and entertain viewers. The series' focus on creating a compelling storyline sometimes comes at the expense of historical accuracy, resulting in a potentially misleading representation of historical figures and events.
Now, another romantic narrative is introduced by the series which is not supported by historical evidence: the alleged love affair between Richard III and his niece, Elizabeth of York. Demonstrating its affinity for incorporating dramatic relationships, the show wholeheartedly embraces this plotline.
However, let's scrutinize it more carefully. During that era, rumors circulated within the court suggesting that Richard might marry his niece, but Richard himself refuted these rumors publicly on March 30th, 1485, in the presence of several prominent London officials. Although he considered remarrying after the death of Anne Neville, his intention was to marry Joanna of Portugal, a Portuguese princess, not Elizabeth. Marrying Elizabeth would have been politically disadvantageous for Richard. Not only was such close kinship generally frowned upon in England, but he had also declared Elizabeth and her siblings illegitimate. Therefore, marrying her would have completely contradicted his own political stance, effectively undermining his claim to the throne.
The historical basis for any genuine relationship rests solely on the fact that Richard once presented her with a book bearing his signature. That's all.
The dramatic tent scenes before the battle, the extended staircases, and the unspoken tension were all created for the sake of drama, without any historical foundation.
The romantic relationship between Richard III and Elizabeth of York, as depicted in the series, appears to be largely fictionalized, with limited historical evidence to support its existence.
The series' decision to incorporate this romantic element likely aims to enhance the narrative's dramatic appeal and captivate viewers, but it deviates from the historical record.
The lack of substantial evidence for the romantic relationship between Richard III and Elizabeth of York raises questions about the series' commitment to historical accuracy and its willingness to prioritize entertainment over factual representation.
The show's depiction of historical events and relationships should be approached with a critical eye, recognizing that dramatic license is often employed to enhance the narrative and engage viewers.
The emphasis on creating a compelling storyline can sometimes come at the expense of historical accuracy, resulting in a potentially misleading portrayal of historical figures and events. The series' portrayal of the alleged romantic relationship between Richard III and Elizabeth of York serves as an example of the creative liberties taken by the show's creators to enhance the drama and intrigue of the narrative.
Speaking of the final battle between Richard III and Henry VII, the one that transferred the crown from one ruler to the other, the series clearly lacked the necessary budget for battle scenes, decent stunt coordination, or anyone capable of staging a credible fight.
The most glaring issue is the depiction of the Battle of Bosworth Field, where the keyword field seems to have been overlooked as it takes place in a forest. In reality, the battle occurred on open ground, representing a pivotal turning point in English history. The series' portrayal is remarkably underwhelming, particularly given Richard's thorough preparation.
One of the most crucial moments of the actual battle was his cavalry charge directly towards Henry's position, almost resulting in Henry's death, which would have significantly altered the course of history.
However, for this climactic moment, the series seemed to have only around 20 extras running back and forth with swords. It's a shame, because this was a defining moment in the Wars of the Roses, deserving a far more impactful and intense portrayal than what was presented.
The depiction of the Battle of Bosworth Field in the series appears to be a significant departure from historical accuracy, lacking the scale and intensity that characterize the actual event.
This series' limited budget likely contributed to the underwhelming portrayal of the battle, resulting in a less impactful and less historically accurate representation. The portrayal of historical battles requires significant resources and attention to detail to accurately capture the scale and intensity of the events. The series' failure to adequately depict the Battle of Bosworth Field highlights the challenges of adapting historical events for television, particularly when budget constraints and creative liberties come into play. The discrepancy between the historical reality of the Battle of Bosworth Field and its portrayal in the series serves as a reminder of the importance of consulting multiple sources and critically evaluating historical dramas. The series' portrayal of the Battle of Bosworth Field falls short of accurately representing the historical significance and intensity of the event, potentially misleading viewers about the true nature of this pivotal moment in English history. In summary, The White Queen is a commendable series that is more credible compared to its sequels, The White Princess and especially The Spanish Princess. If you want to immerse yourself in the world of the Wars of the Roses, this show is certainly worth watching. Just remember to keep one eye on the screen and the other on reliable sources such as Wikipedia. A bit of fact-checking is always helpful when history intersects with drama. How about you? Did The White Queen capture your attention? If you found this video engaging, I would greatly appreciate a like. Also, what series or historical film should we explore in a future video together? The importance of fact-checking when watching historical dramas cannot be overstated, as these shows often take liberties with historical accuracy for the sake of entertainment. Consulting multiple sources, such as historical texts, scholarly articles, and reputable websites, can help viewers distinguish between factual events and dramatic embellishments. The series' portrayal of historical events should be approached with a critical eye, recognizing that the creator's primary goal is to entertain viewers, which may lead to deviations from historical accuracy.
Engaging with historical dramas can be an enjoyable and educational experience, but it is crucial to supplement the information presented with independent research and critical thinking.
The series' portrayal of historical figures and events should be seen as one interpretation among many, and viewers should be encouraged to explore alternative perspectives and historical sources.
The act of fact-checking not only enhances viewers' understanding of history, but also fosters critical thinking skills and encourages a more nuanced appreciation of the past.
Historical dramas can serve as a gateway to further exploration and learning about history, but it is essential to approach these shows with a discerning eye and a willingness to verify the information presented.